Our Jewish tradition encourages us to make every effort to prevent and diminish human suffering. And one way that individuals and congregations can work together to accomplish this goal is to gain and share information about a number of genetic diseases which occur disproportionately within the Jewish community. Genetic screening for diseases where being a carrier does not affect one's health enables people to learn important information about the genes that they may pass on to their offspring. And a simple blood test can give information that will empower the individual to plan for future children to be born without diseases that are preventable. But this is not my expertise. The people who are here today will tell you more about that. What I do know is that our congregations, our Jewish communal organizations, and our Jewish professionals can make a very big difference. Congregations, clergy, and professionals who work with young adults on college campuses and in other communal settings have a special role to play in increasing awareness and diminishing the suffering caused by these diseases. Those involved particularly in officiating at marriages and in premarital counseling have an especially urgent responsibility to provide the information about diseases that can be prevented. Some people may mistakenly hesitate to make young people aware that their Jewish heritage may put them at risk for bearing children with serious diseases. But sharing this information affords a critical opportunity to let those young people know that their Jewish community is deeply committed to helping them to have healthy families and to accompanying them through all of life's many challenges and joys. Even before marriage and planned pregnancy, both individuals and couples need to be aware of the availability of this screening so that they can become proactive in family planning. Your congregation can provide this information in a variety of ways. Clergy can make the information available to all the couples with whom they meet prior to marriage. Preschools can provide information to parents of young children who may add to their families, but they may believe because they have one healthy child that they are not at risk. Older teens can be provided with information in confirmation and youth group sessions. And this will allow for a discussion of basic medical facts as well as ethical considerations. Congregations can hold health fairs in which professionals from excellent Jewish organizations committed to providing education and screening can be present. And adult education programs can be held, which include text studies and discussion of biomedical ethics, so that congregants can have an opportunity to learn of the rabbinic and scientific discourse on these subjects. Most importantly, we want you to know that the Union for Reform Judaism is here to help you as an individual and your congregation to develop programming about Jewish genetic diseases in your congregation and in your community. Please contact me and at the Union for Reform Judaism. I think all of you will have a brochure that was provided by the Victor Foundation in your welcome packages, and that will include information about how to contact them, but also how to contact me at my website, emencher@urj.org. And a vital step that I will recommend is that your congregation make a connection to excellent organizations who can provide up-to-date medical, genetic, and information about what to do so that these diseases can be prevented. But please know you can also turn to us because we are working in partnership to bring information forward in ways that can be most useful and can really help all of our families. Thank you so much for being here, and please, when you leave here, know that the brochure you're carrying is most useful if you share it with someone else in your home community. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to echo what Rabbi Manship said. My name is Rabbi Larry Cernovitz, and I am one of the rabbis at Old York Road Temple Beth Am in Abington, Pennsylvania, about a half an hour north of the city. I will share a lot of my words after our two other presenters. Do you want to say hi too? Yep. Okay. After our two other, go ahead.
Hi.
This is my son Sam, and you'll hear more about him shortly. But before I introduce Cindy Singer and Dr. Schneider to make their presentations. What I do want to say is this. More? You want to say more? Go ahead.
Hi.
But what I do want to say is I want to thank not just Rabbi Manship and the Union for Reform Judaism. I want to thank Rabbi Rick Jacobs and Rabbi Jonah Pesner, both. Hold on one second. Both of who are very committed to this issue. Many years ago, there was a resolution passed by the Union about Jewish genetic diseases and awareness. And as Rabbi Manship and I spoke about, that once a resolution's passed doesn't necessarily mean that anything's done. And once the resolution was passed, and the Central Conference of American Rabbis also passed a resolution, now it's time to act on those resolutions. And together with Rabbi Manship, along with the Union for Reform Judaism, this is going to be, as Rabbi Jacobs told me, this is going to be a major initiative of the Union moving forward from this time, which this presentation really gives us the moment to be able to launch that. And it's important to mention that while our attendance is not so great at the moment, I know that we got a bum rap at the time at 2 o'clock on Wednesday when everybody's coming in to the biennial. So you are honored, we're honored to have you here because this is going to be a very important session about Jewish genetic diseases and testing. I want to introduce Cindy Singer. And Cindy, by trade, is a makeup artist, and she'll tell you more, or designer. She'll tell you more about her story in a moment. But the one thing that is Cindy, is truly Cindy, beside the fact that she has a law school education, she is the mother of Dylan, and this is Dylan who certainly couldn't make the trip down here to be with us today. And Cindy, about really 15 years ago, because Dylan's 15, once he was born and diagnosed with FD, she went to the Jewish community in suburban Philadelphia to plead her case and to get people interested in this cause, and no one took her up on it. And Cindy, her story is remarkable and what she's done with Dylan. And Dylan became a bar mitzvah at our synagogue recently, and it was a beautiful celebration of that day. But I want to call Cindy forward to share her story.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming. As an aside, I have been introduced today, and I've been here with Becky and Larry, and so this is my wife, and I'm Rabbi Sonovitz, and this is Cindy Singer, and I was trying to figure out the right word, so I think I'll designate myself as activist advocate when I am introduced, because that's really what this is about. It's becoming an activist, and it's also advocating, as I have always done, for my son Dylan. So this is Dylan. You're seeing him in all his various stages of health and age. He is 15 years old, and he has familial dysautonomia, known as FD. And on most days, it really is FFD, and the F, be creative and fill in the blank. He was born at Pennsylvania Hospital on November 6, 1996, and diagnosed 3.5 months later on February 12, 1997, and that truly was a day that we will remember forever, and that date is embedded. I had a difficult pregnancy, but one that wasn't necessarily attributed to FD. The doctors reassured me that Dylan would be small but healthy, had several ultrasounds to really confirm that, but that was not the case. Dylan was delivered at 37 weeks by emergency C-section. The umbilical cord was wrapped twice around his neck, and he was blue. He also ruptured both lungs upon resuscitation and had to be intubated for a short time, and he was immediately taken to the NICU. Happily, though, or so we thought, Dylan rebounded really quickly from his traumatic birth experience, and we look forward to the day that we would bring him home. But then the real odyssey began. Still at Pennsylvania Hospital, he could not maintain his body temperature above 97 degrees. He had a poor suck and swallow and was unable to take in enough nutrition to maintain and increase body weight. A feeding tube passing from Dylan's nose into his stomach had to be placed, and he received supplemental tube feedings. The doctors were really baffled and did not have an explanation for Dylan's failure to thrive, which is actually a classic early symptom of FD. We had many consults from many specialists, including one from an Ashkenazi Jewish geneticist who only wanted to rule out other genetic diseases such as Prader-Willi and Fragile X. Looking back, it would later shock me that she didn't even consider the possibility of testing let alone diagnosing Dylan with any of the Jewish genetic diseases. At that point, the only thing that doctors would say is that Dylan was born 3 weeks early. I didn't think that was such a big deal, and that he would have to play catch-up, which was expected by the time that he would reach his actual due date, but the catch-up never happened. The weeks passed, and the doctors decided that it would in fact take Dylan a little longer to catch up, and that there would be a greater success of that happening if we took him home from the hospital. So that's what we did. So for the first time at 6 weeks, that's when we brought Dylan home. How Dylan wasn't catching up, and things went from bad to worse. Dylan began to vomit after every feed, and he began to lose weight. The best advice that we would receive from our pediatrician, and this is the truth, was that I should put on some makeup for our visits. It was the truth and outrageous, and needless to say, we found a new pediatrician. After a particularly difficult day in early 1997, 10 days after Dylan first came home from the hospital, we found ourselves in the ER of Abington Hospital, which is a suburb of Philadelphia. Dylan was vomiting constantly. This time, a more permanent NG tube was placed under fluoroscopy or x-ray. As a family, we were completely distraught. As a mother, I knew something was wrong. Call it mother's intuition, call it not wanting to have a child with a diagnosis, but I did just know. And again, the doctors found nothing except maybe severe reflux, prepared to send us home with an NG tube, feeding therapy consult, and antacids. However, before discharging us, the attending pediatrician at Abington first suggested that since I was clearly an hysterical first-time mother, and since I was at such a heightened state of distress, a few more days in the hospital could be arranged so that I could get my act together. Again, I kid you not. So home we went, and Dylan became sicker. He was vomiting with such intensity that he actually vomited out the NG tube. Our latest pediatrician referred us to Dr. Judy Birnbaum at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, CHOP. She became our guide and is now considered one of our family adopted members. For the first time, I asked the question that through the years would be my mantra and would be a question that I would ask over and over again. If this were your child, what would you do? And Dr. Birnbaum said, I'd admit him. And on January 21st, 10 weeks after Dylan was born, and 3 hospitals later, that is exactly what we did. Dylan was admitted to CHOP, and what we could not know at that moment, but would soon learn, was that January 27th would be the beginning of the mourning the loss of what should have been our healthy son. And on February 21st, 1997, at NYU Medical Center, our 4th hospital in 14 weeks, Dylan was formally diagnosed with FD. So what has life been like over the last 15 years, you may ask, and what does a typical day look like for Dylan? Well, he suffers daily. He experiences what is known as an FD crisis every 3 hours, even with the arsenal of medicine that he takes to prevent them. And for Dylan, the crisis looks like the following. It begins with nausea so severe that he can spend hours retching. Along with the nausea comes the inevitable fluctuations in blood pressure. His pressure can go so high that a healthy person would be on the verge of a stroke. And then minutes and truly minutes later, it could be so far into the basement that he's passed out. The thing that is so miraculous about Dylan is that when it's over, and he's always smiling. People with FD are unable to produce overflow tears. In other words, Dylan could cry, but you wouldn't see the tears. But the thing about Dylan, that in spite of everything, he never cries. He's the most resilient young man I have ever known, regardless of whether he's my own or not. And because people with FD do not produce tears, they are at risk of ulcerating their corneas and going blind. At 4 years old, Dylan had his first and thankfully only corneal ulceration. He has a scar, one of which I refer to as his battle scars, on his left cornea, but fortunately, his vision remains unaffected. He receives eye drops every 2 hours. People with FD are unable to adequately coordinate their swallow. This is particularly difficult when attempting to swallow liquids or their very own saliva. As a result, Dylan, like most individuals with FD, has a feeding tube in order to maintain adequate nutrition and hydration. In Dylan's case, his swallowing ability is so poor that he requires all of his feeding and nutrition through a G-tube. He eats nothing. Every once in a while, I am overcome by the sad fact that Dylan misses one of life's many great pleasures, and that's eating. People with FD can be ataxic or walk with an unsteady gait. This occurs because their vestibular system or sense of balance is dysfunctional. Simply explained, Dylan doesn't recognize the difference between standing straight or if he's leaning. As a result, Dylan has been unable to properly bear weight on his lower extremities. He has pronated or turned in hips and valgus or deformed feet. While Dylan is able to walk short distances, he requires the assistance of a wheelchair for mobility of longer distances. Dylan is also autistic and nonverbal, and this is not an unusual characteristic of FFD, but 10% of those afflicted with it are autistic, so it is rare. Explanations for this vary and are inconclusive. In spite of the fact that Dylan is nonverbal, he does speak volumes. He communicates with a device programmed with a voice output, and actually, the device is an iPad, and the program is a pro loquo. His poor stamina does not allow him to attend school for a full day, but he does attend with a nurse 3 hours per day, and the recovery is quick. But this is not always the case with FD. In May of last year, Dylan developed a cold and nearly died. Within 24 hours, he was on a ventilator at the pediatric ICU at CHOP. The cold had quickly become a pneumonia, and Dylan's left lung was completely compressed, and the right lung wasn't too far behind. Because Dylan was too sick to withstand surgery, doctors placed a chest tube in the bedside with the hope of draining the fluid that was flooding his lungs. Dylan was suffocating. That did not work, and the fluid had become very, very thick, and they had to do surgery or a VATS procedure to suck out what had become an infection or empyema. Dylan's only chance of survival was surgery to remove or suck out the infection. The surgeons, with tears in their eyes, told us to kiss Dylan as they wheeled him into surgery. The surgery was successful, and a month later, Dylan came home. Earlier, I spoke of Dylan's resilience, but the doctors and the x-rays would show later that the recovery was downright miraculous. It is often hard to believe that with all that Dylan endures in a single day, every day, that he even has the ability to smile. But for him, his near-death experience appears to be a distant memory, and he always continues to find reasons to smile and to laugh, and so do we. Because as a family, we have learned to redefine normal and turn lemons into lemonade. When Dylan was born, Plan B was born too. I quit my job to become a stay-at-home mom. We had a beautiful home in Bucks County. Quickly, it was apparent that we were unable to support the mortgage, and we began to drown in debt. My parents came to the rescue. We sold our home, paid off our debt, moved into the 4-bedroom home in which I grew up, and we never left. 4 years later, with the help of genetic testing that had become available since I had given birth to my second child, a healthy and equally magnificent boy named Brandon. The years continued to pass, and as Dylan approached his 13th birthday, and that's appropriate because that's his bar mitzvah, it occurred to me that I wanted him to become a bar mitzvah. He had missed so many typical milestones in his life that I did not want this to become another, and I never, and for those of you that know me, I never take no for an answer. And so, in the summer of 2010, Dylan became a bar mitzvah. The love and the karma on the bima and the entire sanctuary still, to this day, leaves me speechless, another thing that is difficult to do. I would imagine that you would ask, how did Dylan become a bar mitzvah if he is unable to speak? Earlier, you may recall when I said he is nonverbal but speaks volumes. On the bima, my parents draped Dylan with his talis and that they had purchased in Israel. Jake, the son of a very good family friend, had become a bar mitzvah 6 months prior, and with the help of a wonderful tutor, he recorded the prayers and the last line of Torah portion into Dylan's iPad. Each prayer was assigned a corresponding photo. When it came to his time to recite each prayer, Dylan would press the photo and lead us in prayer. With the exception of the last line, I and my 2 sisters read Dylan's Torah portion. Dylan led us in the final verse of his Torah portion, and he, along with Rabbi Cernovitz by his side, became a bar mitzvah. It was, and remains, one of the most magnificent days of our lives. Caring for a child with a Jewish genetic disease, or for that matter, a child with any chronic illness, is plan-changing and life-altering. It affects every aspect of family life, socially, economically, and emotionally. We cannot easily make plans to go out, even on a Saturday night. This requires having additional nursing coverage for Dylan. As a couple, we have not had our own vacation overnight alone in 15 years. If a nurse is unable to come in on a designated shift, then either I or my husband inevitably loses a day of work in order to take care of Dylan. For necessities not covered by insurance, the out-of-pocket costs can be tremendous. And emotionally, you are forced to think of things that you otherwise would never normally think about. You have to figure out guardianship. Who will care for Dylan if something happens to me or my husband, Ben? From the very beginning, you must ask the difficult questions that come along with choosing a guardian. A guardian who would be able to make the commitment of caring for Dylan in their home and not place him in an institution. And if I'm being totally honest, sometimes I think it would be better, and not anytime soon, if Dylan would pass before me, because then I can't think of anyone who would care for him more than I would. not to worry. It's not something I dwell on daily, but it's something that you think about and not natural order. And yet, in spite of all this, and except for Dylan's suffering, I wouldn't change anything about our lives. We have been blessed by perspective and knowing what really matters. And although it's been a hard road, we know what really is important. True, some days are longer and more difficult than others. There are constant phone calls doing battle. Doctors, insurance companies, teachers, education administrators, medical supply companies, nursing agencies, etc. Most of whom, no matter how many times you tell them, can't even spell the disease, let alone know what it is. It's exhausting and just frankly pisses me off. And when people say I don't know how you do it, I say simply, you don't even think about it, you just do it. And I'm so fortunate not to have to do it alone. My parents and my sisters are always tremendously supportive. But my husband, who is truly my rock, always sees the light at the end of the tunnel. So why do I share our story? Our story, it's not to make you sad, but to motivate you. The concept is so simple, really. Get a blood test and save a life. No child should ever be born with a Jewish genetic disease. Remember earlier when I told you about the doctor at Abington who told me that I was an hysterical first-time mother? I am the mother of a chronically ill child with a devastating Jewish genetic disease. I am not hysterical, although I have been known to become hysterical at different times. But it's too late for Dylan, but not too late for your children, your grandchildren, your family, and friends to get tested, so that no child is ever born with any one of these Jewish genetic diseases, as there are 19. Thank you.
As I grew up in the Philadelphia area, when I came to the synagogue, came back to the synagogue, and Sam was diagnosed, Cindy came out of the woodwork. And we never knew that there were two families that lived with an affected child in one congregation. And Cindy has been by my side through all of this. And as we continue to create more awareness and advocacy for Jewish genetic diseases, Cindy's my partner and one of my best friends, and it's been an honor to work with her and to get to know her. And hopefully you'll take some time as well after the session's over to get to know Cindy a little bit better, because she's incredible. Yes?
Is there a preconception test that the parents can take to see if they're recessive?
You have led perfectly into the next presenter, which will cover all of the medical aspects. Dr. Schneider, who is the medical director of the Victor Center for Jewish Genetic Diseases at Einstein Medical Center in Philadelphia. And Adele, actually, the small world of it is that when we found out that Sam had been diagnosed with FD, we went down to the Victor Center. Somebody had told us about it. And we went down, and Dr. Schneider was one of the first people we spoke with about this, and is an incredible, incredible individual, incredibly knowledgeable about Jewish genetic diseases and awareness. And she's going to present at this time, but she's also our partner in creating this awareness campaign nationally. So Dr. Schneider,
Thanks.
it's all yours.
Thank you, Rabbi Larry. I need to make it big.
Yep.
Thank
you
you.
go. Pleasure.
Thank you, everybody. And I can't say enough about how wonderful it is to be here, to have an opportunity to talk to you as a wonderful group of caring people here at URJ. I was at URJ in 2005, and nothing much has happened between then and now. But now we have Rabbi Ed Manship working with us, Rabbi Cernowitz and Cindy. We have a team, we're motivated, and we are ready to go. And now that you are part of our team, you are also going to be spokespeople for us. So we're really grateful that you're here. I'm going to talk a bit about the who, what, why, where, when, and how of Jewish genetic disease screening. I want to make it so that it's user-friendly, so that you can go back to your congregations and tell people it's really not a difficult thing to do. So who should be screened? Young Jewish adults of reproductive age. We will not screen anybody under the age of 18 who cannot sign their own consent form. I have had one experience where a child, well, she was a young girl of 17 and 364 out of 365 days old. Her mother signed the consent form, and when I called the mother, with her result, and she was a carrier, the mother said, well, I may not tell her. That did it for me. They have got to sign their own consent form. When you have a couple who are together, married, planning to get married, you can start screening one member of that couple if they're not pregnant. If they're pregnant, start with both. How Jewish is Jewish enough? One Jewish grandparent is Jewish enough. If someone is married to a non-Jew, and this is happening more and more in a realistic world that we live in here, always screen the Jewish partner first, because when we're doing these screenings, we're looking at specific gene changes that occur in the Ashkenazi Jewish population. So if we're going to screen someone who's of a different ethnicity with Jewish mutations, we're not going to find what it is that we need to find. If the Jewish person is a carrier, we will need to screen the non-Jewish partner. And often you'll need a genetic counselor to help you. So as non-medical people, and most of the time I talk to medical people, I think it's important for you to know who is a genetic counselor. A genetic counselor they've been screened for, you don't need to get screened again for what you've been screened for before. It doesn't increase the accuracy of the screening. These tests are very accurate tests. And we encourage people to check back before each pregnancy to make sure that they've been screened for the right diseases. So how do you do that? You need to go to your doctor, and often the doctor doesn't really know what to do. So that is one of the problems. What if only one of us is Ashkenazi Jewish? And we talked a little bit about that. But these conditions occur in the general population at a lower frequency. So you can't write off the fact that you're not married to a Jewish person. And certain ethnic groups have a higher frequency of some of these diseases. An example is the Irish have a higher carrier rate for Tay-Sachs disease. For those of you who read the New York Times, about a month or two ago, there was an article called Dragon Mom, an Irish woman who had a baby with Tay-Sachs disease. About 2 months ago in Philadelphia, I saw a baby with Tay-Sachs disease. Both parents are Irish. So we're seeing very few babies with Tay-Sachs disease who are Jewish, because most doctors at least know to screen for Tay-Sachs disease. But it's becoming more obvious that there are other groups in the community who need to be screened for Tay-Sachs. In the Philadelphia area, the Irish and the Jews live very close to each other, and they do intermarry a lot. So we have to be cognizant of that. So like I said, test the Jewish partner first, and then test the other partner if you need to. So who are the Ashkenazi Jews? In the United States, 90% of the Jews are Ashkenazi. People from Europe, Eastern and Central Europe, my pointer is not working, and Poland, Germany, Russia, Lithuania, those kinds of countries. The Sephardic and Middle Eastern Jews have different diseases, and it depends on the country of origin. So there, you would definitely need a genetic counselor to help you. So how does this happen? Why are the Jews the chosen people? I mean, we know about the biblical part, but what about Jewish genetic diseases? So the theory is called the founder effect, where there's a high frequency of the specific gene mutation in a population that was founded by a small group. So if you look at this first picture, in the original population, there's that one orange guy who is the carrier, and he's kind of dwarfed by a large population. You don't really notice him so much, but that population for some reason gets smaller. Maybe a pogrom, maybe they moved, some illness. And that guy now is a big fish in a small pond. And he, like most Jewish people should be, is fruitful and multiplies. And now we see, generations later, a lot of carriers. So that is why there are so many carriers for these diseases, because Jews have tended to marry among themselves. And as we talked about, who is Jewish enough? Eastern and Central Europe, one Jewish grandparent, and when in doubt, screen. I mean, I would not turn anybody away who says, I think I'm Jewish. And you can't go by Jewish last names anymore, because my son is about to marry a non-Jewish girl, and her last name is going to be Cohen. I said, you know, your kids are going to get lined up with the Jewish kids. They have to be Jewish. So the names are not going to be clues in future generations. So these diseases that we are going out and screening are autosomal recessive diseases. And what that means is that you need both parents to be carriers for the same gene in order to have an affected child. And with every pregnancy, there's a 1 in 4 risk of having an affected child. So that is the critical number to know. If you're both carriers, it's a 25% risk with each pregnancy. Both males and females are affected. It can pass many generations undetected because a carrier is healthy. There is no way looking at a person to know that they're a carrier. If we say 1 in 5 people is a carrier, and that's the number that we say for now, in New York it's a higher carrier rate. There are about 15 people here. 3 of us in this room are carriers for something. So, and we're excluding Cindy and Larry because we know that they are. Okay, so there you go. So Cindy's one of them. So you see, it's there. There's no way that you would know looking at a person. It's important to do the blood test. And when people are related, when people who are cousins marry, there's an increased likelihood of them both carrying it. All of us, irrespective of our ethnic group, are carriers for some of these recessive disorders. Many of them are so rare that we will never encounter a partner who is also a carrier. And we will not know unless we get tested. How does this work? A change or a mutation in a gene causes it to malfunction. So the gene is producing a protein that does the job. So say that protein is an enzyme that breaks down a product, and you've got a mutation, so that enzyme is not being produced in enough amounts, or it's abnormal, so it doesn't do the job. It results in excessive buildup of the toxic substance in the brain or other organs, and then you get symptoms of the disease. Carriers, as I said, are healthy individuals. One of the genes of the pair is mutated, the other one is working. The one that is working is providing enough of the active protein to do the job and keep the person healthy. They are not at risk of developing the condition, and there's usually no family history, again, because carriers don't have any symptoms, and it can go many generations without having it affected. So how do you find out you're a carrier? Carrier screening with a blood test or having an affected child. Those are the only 2 ways. So I feel we have an obligation to screen and prevent these diseases in the next generation. And now we are the people who know this. So what are we screening for? This is a daunting list of diseases, and I'll test you afterwards. But in the blue bags that you got at registration is a brochure from the Victor Center called Sammy's Story, and you saw Sammy running around here. And that is a story about Larry Cernowitz's son, Sammy. Inside it is a matrix with a list of all these diseases and a little blurb about each one of them. So I'm not going to bore you with that list, but you can see there is a long list. All of these diseases are severe. Some result in death early in childhood, like Tay-Sachs disease, which is the one we're most familiar with. Gaucher disease is the most common one. And you're likely to meet people with Gaucher disease who look perfectly healthy because there is treatment for Gaucher disease. That is the one for which there is the most effective treatment. For all the others, there's palliative treatment for some of them, no treatment for some of them, and an in-between kind of thing where you treat the symptoms and you help people to live a better life. So how do we select the diseases to screen for? I mean, that's not just arbitrarily done, that, and that. The disease needs to have a significant burden and be severe. We also look at how frequent it is in the population. So a carrier rate of about 1 in 100 is used, and the test detection rate has to be greater than 90%, so that when you go out there, your test is a reliable test. In Gaucher disease, some people will argue, and in England they won't test for Gaucher disease. In Israel, they're not so keen on it either, because they say, well, it's a treatable disease and it's a mild disease. So a lot of times when people get screened for Gaucher disease, just knowing that they're carriers, they test the baby at birth. And that way they know to monitor the child's health and institute treatment if there are any symptoms that develop. So why do we screen? Well, 1 in 5 Ashkenazi Jews is a carrier for at least one of these diseases, and sometimes we detect people who are carriers of 3 diseases and they're perfectly healthy. We feel, and remember I'm a medical person, I feel strongly that this knowledge empowers a person because it enables them to make decisions about family planning. And in response to the question that you asked about what testing is available, if you test before you are pregnant, you have more options than if you test when you're already pregnant. So testing before pregnancy enables you to have the option which is newish, expensive, but approved by every rabbinic authority in Judaism, from Reform to extremely Orthodox, where they do in vitro fertilization and they test embryos, but you need to know what you're testing for. So you have to have been screened beforehand, both the mom and the dad. There are charitable organizations that will fund this because it is expensive if people's insurance doesn't cover it. Other alternatives, if you know before you're pregnant, is egg donation and sperm donation from a non-carrier, and adoption is another option. But what is really interesting to me is how smart Judaism is, because an egg, a fertilized egg in the lab does not have personhood status in Judaism. So in vitro fertilization and having embryos in a lab you don't have any limitations. You can discard the embryos and nobody's going to come after you. So all rabbis approve of that. Again, we're screening for recessive diseases with a 1 in 4 chance. And there, as I said, there are 2 ways to find out if you are a carrier: by having a test or having an affected child. So continuing with other reasons to be screened, you don't know you're a carrier until you get tested. And one of the most interesting things is when Tay-Sachs screening was initiated in the 1970s, there were 50 to 60 babies with Tay-Sachs being born in the Jewish community in the US every year. That has decreased by 90%, and it's very rare now to have a baby born with Tay-Sachs disease in the US. So it's very successful, and I think Larry can tell you, since they found the gene for familial dysautonomia in 2001, the number of babies with familial dysautonomia being born has decreased. It's not totally gone, because there's still a level of ignorance among medical people, and people will say, well, doctors don't know everything. They really don't. And as much as we need to educate the community, we also need to educate the medical community. So where can you get screened? A physician or a genetic counselor should be able to do it for you. There are Jewish genetic disease screening programs scattered around the country. If you need to find out about one close to you, you can go to the Victor Center website. Community screenings occur in some communities, and those are pretty much well advertised when they happen. You can also find a genetic counselor close to you by going to the National Society of Genetic Counseling website and find out where there's a genetic counselor close by. So when to get screened? We have dilemmas about this. I started the Victor Center program on college campuses. I loved doing it. The kids were enthusiastic. They got information. There was no feeling of this is a bad thing. It was a very positive thing. But the kids that we screened in 2001 and 2002 now have to go, before they get married, and get screened for the new diseases. Did I know when I started that there were going to be 19 diseases in 2011? No. So when is the best time to do it? I think each individual has to decide, but certainly before pregnancy is absolutely what it has to be, and then an update between each pregnancy. So options for carrier couples we talked about before pregnancy. During pregnancy, there's prenatal testing with chorionic villus sampling around 10 to 12 weeks and amniocentesis around 15 weeks. If you find that you have an affected child when you're pregnant, this leads to having to make decisions about termination of pregnancy or continuing a pregnancy and how you want to handle it. And this is definitely an individual decision. A lot of counseling and support is needed. It's a lot easier to know before you get pregnant. So how do we screen? It's a blood test. The reason it's a blood test is because we absolutely insist that you have to do enzyme for Tay-Sachs disease so that you can get the best result. There are some labs that are not doing enzyme, they're just doing DNA, and we feel you're going to miss too many carriers because of the commingling of Jewish and non-Jewish genes now. You're not always going to be able to find the Jewish mutations if someone is of mixed background. A doctor or a genetic counselor can do it for you. We think you need informed consent so that you understand what recessive diseases are, that a carrier is a healthy person, to be able to interpret the results, and then recommendations for carriers. If I'm a carrier, it means one of my parents is a carrier, my siblings need to be tested. Genetics is not just about me, it's about my whole family and about my whole community. So now you are part of the community of informed people. I urge you to take these words everywhere you go. If you need information, contact Rabbi Manship. She will pass on information. You can contact the Victor Center, and I will be hanging around. There's a Victor Center booth in the exhibit hall. You can come visit us, and we'll schmooze. So thank you very much.
So I am going to begin my presentation. I want to thank Dr. Schneider for being here and for making that presentation. There's a lot of really important information. A lot of that information can be found in the brochure that was given to you in your biennial bags. It's a big initiative, and as the biennial registration has closed because there were so many people, that's how many people actually received brochures this year at the biennial, which is a huge, huge initiative for us. So there are plenty more, and you can certainly pick up more at the Victor Center booth in the exhibition hall, because the key is that you are, as Dr. Schneider said, you are ambassadors now. And as informed members of the Jewish community, you need to go out and you need to help to spread the word.
And just add
Yes.
that in a read-only form, the Victor Center brochure is available on the URJ website.
Great.
If you go to URJ/JGD, Jewish
Good.
Genetic Diseases.org, and you can read
Good.
it there and find out all the information about where to contact.
Which, by the way, is completely new. Now that the union has made this an important initiative, that now there's a website that's set up, a link from the URJ site that will give many, many people information about Jewish genetic diseases. So, Rabbi Manship, we thank you very much for that. Well, I want to begin with speaking about awareness with a video that was done this past high holidays. That with Dr. Schneider and the Victor Center, we, just like they did in Atlanta as well as in New York, we embarked on a citywide campaign for Jewish genetic awareness. It didn't succeed entirely the way we wanted, and one of those reasons on why it didn't was because there are synagogues that actually turned down the brochures. There are synagogues that said they didn't want the brochures in their synagogue and wouldn't hand them out. So it talks about the immense amount of work that we have to do to get the word out. A lot of it is ignorance. A lot of it is the inability to understand truly the impact that Jewish genetic diseases has on people's lives. And I'll share a little bit more of my story in a moment, but I want to start with this video. There's more to that video. However, in light of that, I'll just continue, which we're here today, and we're grateful to be here today to spread awareness. And to begin, that we all have music that we grow up with, music that defines our lives and penetrates our souls, music that we listen to when we need a lift, or music when we're in one of those contemplative moods. Paul Simon, for those of you who are Paul Simon fans, is one of those influences for me. I can distinctly remember as a kid lying in bed at night and turning on my turntable, and yes, I'm old enough to have had a turntable, and falling asleep to his music. Feeling Groovy is one of those songs that lifted me up, made me smile, and today reminds me of days gone by when life was just a little bit easier, when life was carefree and so beautiful. Feeling Groovy was released in 1966, when Paul Simon was just 25 years old. The words are reminiscent of the decade of the 60s and a philosophy of life that encouraged us to live and to enjoy life as much as possible. Feeling Groovy takes me back to when life was easier and so much less complicated. When we were young and naive, when we felt that nothing could hurt us, when we felt untouchable, immortal, and free, where nothing really held us back. It was a time when we believed life could be anything that we wanted it to be. We were dreamers and were excited about what the future had in store for us. But we all knew, even if it was way off the radar screen, that at some point we had to grow up. And for the most part, most of us did. Life never seems to slow down. We're always running somewhere or from somewhere, from one appointment or meeting to the next. We're constantly looking to slow down but never do. Sometimes it just isn't in the cards. Yet we consider it a luxury once in a while to make the morning last when we're able to casually wake up, even on weekends, sip our coffee and leisurely read the paper. Maybe we could even head out and go kicking down the cobblestones, looking for fun and feeling groovy. You can sing that later if you'd like, which we did on the high holidays. We all tried to plan for the future, or what we thought we wanted our lives to be. We got jobs, lost jobs, rented apartments, bought our first car, got our first serious girlfriend or boyfriend, maybe got divorced, maybe married, maybe remarried, maybe never married at all. Had our first child, or maybe we weren't able to. As the years progressed, we made friends and lost some along the way, whether they were friends from elementary school, high school, our undergraduate, or graduate studies. What we really tried to do was reach for the American dream, of what we believed we deserved, what we thought was attainable, especially for Jews living in America. Along the way, we realized that as much as we tried to plan, life happened. And as the Yiddish expression goes, man tracht u Gott lacht, man plans and God laughs. When my wife Becky and I got married, we were excited about what the future would hold. My wife was working as a recruiter at Lehman Brothers in New York City. Need I say more? And I was entering into my last year of rabbinic school. The future was bright, and we dreamt of what the future would bring and the family that we would create together. We were no different than any other couple, any other set of newlyweds. Our lives changed forever when our son, Sam, was diagnosed as the 637th person in the world with familial dysautonomia, one of 19 Jewish genetic diseases. Yeah, we planned, and God certainly did seem to laugh at our expense. I was tested in college for Tay-Sachs and had no idea that there was anything more. Ironically, at the time, I was president of my fraternity, Alpha Epsilon Pi, a Jewish fraternity, which Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel happened to be members of as well. I had been responsible for sponsoring a free screening on campus for Tay-Sachs. Who knew that 20 years later, another 18 Jewish genetic diseases would have been discovered, that Becky and I would both be carriers, and our son Sam would be affected. As you heard from Dr. Schneider, both parents must be carriers in order for a child to be born with a Jewish genetic disease. And even then, there's only a 25% chance. Since Becky wasn't a carrier of Tay-Sachs, we thought everything would be okay. When she became pregnant, she was screened for a panel of Jewish genetic diseases, including FD. When we were married, nobody told us to get screened. However, we found out that the doctor who had screened us, the obstetrician, had never read the results and told us that everything would be fine. Everything was fine. As a young couple, we didn't know to ask for the copy of the test results, which is all a part of what needs to happen and what people need to tell young couples, because they need to be advocates for themselves, as nobody else is looking out for them. So we thought everything was fine. As a result, for the first 4 months of my son's life, he was unable to suck and swallow, inhibiting his ability to get nutrition and to gain weight. He was diagnosed with failure to thrive and suffered immensely. His pediatrician, who, like his obstetrician, or my wife's obstetrician, happened to be the head of pediatrics at a well-respected local hospital, offered to us that it was probably my wife's breast milk, that it wasn't caloric enough. And he continued by saying that women need to get out of the dark ages. That's why they make formula. As many of you can tell, Sam's shy. He has fluctuations in his blood pressure and his temperature, which on any given day can be severe enough to keep him out of school. This school year alone, he's been absent more than he's been present. A normal cold that would put a child out of commission for a few days can put Sam out of school for a week to 2 weeks because of the way his body responds. When he goes into what's known, as Cindy referred to, as an FD crisis, the occupational and physical therapies that he receives are put on hold, and his gains are diminished. As my wife Becky often explains, as you saw in the small clip of the video, that every day is like a roller coaster. We never know what the day will bring. In fact, this morning as we woke up, we didn't know if Sam would actually be able to be here at the presentation. He could wake up having an amazing day, or he could spend the day lying on the couch sweating and retching as his nausea and fluctuations in blood pressure and temperature wreak havoc on his body. But Sam embraces every opportunity to make the best of any given situation. He gives us hope that the future will be okay, that there's nothing sweeter in the world than when he looks at us, smiles, and says, "I love you, Daddy. I love you, Mommy." Unfortunately, there are many stories like ours. For example, there's a beautiful little girl from Atlanta named Eden, who has what's known as ML4, mucolipidosis 4. It's a progressive neurological disease with devastating symptoms, such as intellectual disability, muscle weakness, retinal degeneration, and unknown life expectancy. If you're recently married or thinking about having children, get tested. Tell your children to get tested, your grandchildren to get tested, your sisters and your brothers. If you happen to be in an interfaith marriage, you still need to get tested, even though you might begin with just the Jewish partner. If they're a carrier of any of these diseases, then the non-Jewish spouse should be tested. Many of us don't know the complete lineage of our families anymore, and all you need to do is produce a carrier of a genetic disease is one Jewish grandparent. It's not worth the risk. With your help, we can eradicate Jewish genetic diseases from our midst. So when my son was diagnosed, he was diagnosed as the 637th individual in the world ever diagnosed with familial dysautonomia. There are, since he was born, another 10 have been born, and living, there are about 320 individuals with familial dysautonomia. So who would have ever figured that two people in the same congregation would have children with familial dysautonomia? And Cindy's son Dylan, who's 15, also has familial dysautonomia.